Good evening and welcome. The City of Hamilton is situated on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg. As a settler, this is a reminder to me that given this agreement and given this covenant, as a settler, it is important for me to think about three things. One, to be very mindful of how much I take. Two, to mindfully leave enough for others. And three, mindfully participate in the cleanup afterwards. And to actively play a role in the share and care of the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. Today, the City of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we may better understand our roles as residents, as neighbors, as partners, and mutual caretakers. It's my honor to welcome my colleague, Maureen Wilson, Ward 1 City Councillor, who will formally welcome us and walk us through the agenda for this evening. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I just have a few housekeeping items to go through before we begin. First of all, this talk will be recorded, and it will be available through the councillors who are here tonight on our website. So if your friends or neighbors were not able to make it here tonight, they will be able to catch it later, or if you'd like to view it again, it will be available. For your information, there are washrooms, an accessible washroom unisex here to my left, and then some more further straight down the hallway. My colleague, Councillor Danko, will introduce Joe tonight. I'm going to endeavor to try and frame the issue for you. And I am going to steal a page right from Joe's book. So if you could imagine for a moment that you are a farmer, and if you could consider Hamilton, the entire city, and look at it the way a farmer might look at it. And ask yourself, as a farmer might ask, what crop is going to produce the greatest yield for you? So Joe is going to lead us and present that kind of information so we can begin looking at our city and start to ask questions about what kind of policy and what kind of investment decisions do we need to make to ensure that we enhance and increase our yield when we make our investments in our city. And what kind of decisions have we made and will we make in the future that will create a surplus wealth that we can use the return on that investment to further fund those things that this community has said is important to us. Affordable housing, parks, green space, but also what investments might undermine our ability to create a stable fiscal environment that might frustrate our efforts to invest in our community and what we say matters to us. So I'm going to call up my colleague, John Paul Danko, and he's going to introduce Joe Minicozzi for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'm John Paul Danko. I'm the Ward 8 City Councillor, if you don't know me. I represent the Central Mountain, or as Joe refers to it, the Shelf. So thank you, Councillor Wilson, for the introduction, as always, our ringleader in these endeavors. And to Councillor Nann, our Ward 1, Ward 3, and Ward 8 office staff who have had many secret meetings pulling these events together. We're all really thrilled that so many Hamilton residents came out tonight to listen and learn about municipal policy so that as elected officials, we can hopefully reach more informed decisions. And you as voters and engaged citizens can have more tools and more depth of information that you need to hold your own elected officials responsible in the years and months to come, no matter where it is in the city that you happen to live. So now is my great pleasure to introduce Joe Minicozzi. Joe is an urban planner imagining new ways to think about and visualize land use, urban design, and economics. Joe founded Urban 3 to explain and visualize market dynamics created by tax and land use policies. Urban 3's work establishes new conversations across multiple professional sectors, policymakers, and the public to creatively address the challenges of urbanization. Urban 3's extensive studies range geographically over 30 states, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Joe holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Miami and a Master of Architecture in Urban Design from Harvard. In 2017, Joe was recognized as one of the 100 most influential urbanists of all time. Please welcome Joe Minicozzi.
Thanks, everyone. I call it a shelf because we have mountains where I'm from in Asheville, and yours is kind of flat. So anyway, it's going to be a little bit awkward for me. I've got two screens, so I'm going to try to look at both of you all, but I'm sort of focused here in the center. I'm going to try to talk about cities. I know that this is not my first time in Hamilton. I was here about 2013, and I love your city. It's an awesome place. It's a quirky place. I'm from a quirky town in North Carolina, and really you have your own play going on here called the City of Hamilton. That you all know the dramas that you go through. I've heard about the exhaustion of the LRT and what you all have been through with that, and I sympathize. There's a lot of weird politics going on in our worlds, in our civic engagement. I'm saying this as an American. You pay attention to what we're going through, and it's deeply unfortunate. And I think that we've lost a level of civic engagement and civic conversations as citizens to talk to each other and have a reasonable discussion about information, what cities are. So if you came here to have a full conversation about the LRT, that's not going to happen. I'm going to talk about cities, economics. I will talk about the LRT and what that means to you all, but also maybe how we should talk about things. So let's first start with Asheville. I don't know if you all have been to Asheville. We're about 4 hours northeast of Atlanta, sorry. These are our mountains. The Smoky Mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains are all through our part of the world. We're 90,000 people. We have bluegrass music. We're known for our music scene, our arts. We're also known for our beer. We have 40 breweries. 40 out of 90,000 people. We drink a lot. And like any quirky little mountain town, we have men dressed as nuns on tall bikes that eat fire. It's your typical little place. Well, Asheville didn't start that way. Asheville started this way. We were a little settlement town up in the mountains, and within 15 years from this picture, this is what we became. We like to say the 3 T's made Asheville: trains, tourism, and tuberculosis, that once the train lines came, it brought a flood of people from the industrial towns and from down in the south to be up in the mountains for our clean air. But we suffered hard times. Like most American cities, like your city, there was a draining of the center or an abandonment of the urban environment. And we would be told by people that that's not who we are. We're not urban anymore. We're rural mountain people. That's what we are. And we basically walked away from this gift that some great civilization left for us. These don't look that unfamiliar to you all, right? This is my downtown. This is the 1990s. That's a 1996 Chevy Celebrity right there. So we basically walked away from this thing. Tens of thousands of years of human civilization have made cities, and within the span of a generation, we all walked away from this stuff. So we developed this attitude that that's not who we are. We're not urban people. We're rural mountain people. We don't care about that stuff. Anytime we try to invest in our downtown, try to work on our downtown, try to do community projects in our downtown, it would be met with this great force and resistance of that's not who we are. So I worked for this guy's company. This is Julian Price. Julian inherited a tremendous amount of money. He put $15 million into a for-profit real estate development company. So our job was to use that $15 million and to keep it as a revolving fund in our downtown to start businesses, to fix buildings. 75% of that money went into sticks and bricks, fixing buildings. 25% went into starting businesses. So we started the first vegetarian restaurant. We created a nightclub. And it was all about doing things that would allow people to live in downtown and have their own typology of development. So in an urban environment, you need that stuff going on. So this is one of our buildings before and after. Real rocket science. It was just making units downtown in a building that was previously a residential building. So this is real rocket science. The banks wouldn't fund this. The banks are just like, those units are too small. They're 400 to 500 square foot apartments. So let me ask you all a question. This is our marketing survey. Who in this room would live in a 400 to 500 square foot apartment? About, let's call it 20% of the audience. Let me change the question. Who in this room has lived in a 400 to 500 square foot apartment? There's our marketing survey. Rather than thinking about where we were, what our attitude was, what our bias was, what our needs were, we thought about the fact that we're 90,000 people. These are only 28 units. Surely there's 28 people that want to live downtown, and we hit it out of the park. Real rocket science. Banks wouldn't fund it. They said there was no market for this. But we just kept ahead, kept going. And what we found is that we weren't having an honest conversation about what cities were. We weren't looking at data. We weren't looking at what's going on from an evidence standpoint, what's happening in our city. So this is where we get into the farm production, that if we think like farmers, when y'all talk to farmers, oh, by the way, I use the word y'all a lot, even though I actually grew up literally just straight east of you in Rome, New York, but I've been in the South long enough. It's a very efficient word. Y'all is good. I'm going to advocate for y'all. If you talk to farmers, farmers are always talking about economic terms. What's the water per acre, the crop yield per acre, et cetera. So this is one of our buildings. So we wouldn't do this building had it not been for the city investing in the public realm. The city built the streetscape project. They gave us a garbage can, a bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree. Thank you, city, for the $20,000 at our front door, right? Some people said that we were subsidized, which I could see that. We didn't build it, but the entire world can walk on it, but that's fair enough. That's our subsidy. We put in retail, office, and residential. So the taxable value of that property went from $300,000 to $11 million. So the taxes that you all get just shot up 3,500%. Isn't that a good return? Anybody have a retirement account that grows by 3,500%? Go out and buy 3,500% more garbage cans. I don't care. How do you build community wealth? How do we help leverage we'll gladly pay our taxes. We just want to see it invested in more return for our community. So let's bring it. You got to pay for affordable housing, artist programs, whatever you need. I don't care. Let's invest in our community. And people are like, well, Joe, that's $11 million. We've got this Walmart over here at $20 million. Fair enough. That Walmart's double the value. I get it. But it took 34 acres of my community to make that Walmart happen. My building's on 0.2 acres. How is that a fair comparison? So per acre, this is how much taxes we pay versus them. Yes, they pay $200,000 in taxes, but it's 34 acres. Do the math. So they're producing $6,500 in taxes. We're producing 100 times that. What would you rather have? Now in North Carolina, in my state, our cities get retail taxes. And oftentimes I hear from people, well, Joe, we take the losses in property taxes for the retail taxes. Okay, let's do the math. Who's producing more? Who would have thought that a furniture store, a barber shop, and a tattoo parlor are more productive than a Walmart? They are. Look at the math. We've also got residential per acre. They've got nothing, and we've got jobs. So if you just look at the data, what would you rather have? Or let me turn it to maybe in your parlance in Canada. If you could grow a crop in Canada, what would you grow? Cash crop, right? This joke works in a lot of places these days. It works in Asheville, but it's illegal. Anyway, you get what I'm saying, right? Cash crop. So I want you to realize this isn't complex math that I'm doing here. This is 5th grade division. Don't overthink this stuff. Think on common terms. These are words that we already use. So if we're talking about cars, could y'all imagine if we're having a pint afterward and I'm just like, hey, my truck gets 650 miles per tank? Like, you'd laugh at me. You're like, Joe, that's stupid. All tanks are different sizes. That's not how we judge vehicles. We judge it on a per liter or per gallon basis. So we say miles per gallon, the numbers change. and we should all be driving BMW Asettas at 70 miles per gallon. Sorry to you Prius owners, but 1955 technology is more efficient, right? We know what that means, efficient, when it comes to a gallon of gasoline or a liter of gasoline. Shouldn't we be doing this for a hectare of land? Shouldn't we have a common language about what's efficient? And that's all I'm asking, is let's just start talking at that language as a data source as we have a conversation. Now, by the way, this little car is incredibly dangerous. If you have a head-on, you're stuck in it, but anyway, it's a cute car. What I found with all of this, I did a presentation in 2009. It was at a National Smart Growth Conference in Seattle. And I stood before an audience of planners and designers and city makers, and I asked the audience, and I'll ask you all, show of hands, who in this room has led, understands the full way that your property tax assessment and millage rates work in your community? Got two hands, 3 hands. So I stood before a room full of people that design cities. About the same number of hands went up, and my hand was in the air. This is a quote from Mark Twain: "A person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't read." Let me tell y'all something. I don't like reading. I'm an architect by training. I like looking at pictures. But I went through and read our tax policies. And so what's crazy to me is that if you read your tax policies, if you follow through a lot of your land use policies, you'll see why we get the places we get. The reason why you get that Walmart's really simple. You tax people less for it. So what I found is that we're essentially functionally illiterate about how our tax system works. We'll talk about what we want. We'll talk about what we think we need. We'll talk about how we feel inside this dais, but we won't understand how the economics are driving any of this stuff. So that's all I'm here to do, is talk about that bigger picture. And why does tax policy matter? Well, here's my downtown. So in 1991, when we started investing in downtown, we didn't get a new building until 2008. So our downtown was a $100 million portfolio, let's say. That's the taxable value of my downtown. We're a $15 million investor inside that. So this is the value return of just fixing up all those upper stories. So as you all walk around buildings downtown and you see the upper stories are vacant, that's opportunity. How can you get those stories active so you're getting taxes out of it? When you improve those buildings, you get cash flow. You're already paying for the street, right? And people, to show you that it's not all love and roses in Asheville, you guys will appreciate this. This is Chris Peterson. These are some of his campaign ads from the 1990s. Here's Chris. I love Chris. And here he is complaining about downtown investment, $26 million. Look at this poor guy. He's crying. So upset. Downtown development for bureaucrats instead of streets, sewer, and waters for our citizens. Y'all got people like that? Every community I go to has a Chris. That's cool. You know, I like Chris. Chris has got a point. $26 million is a lot of money. Anybody have 26 million bucks in your pocket? I don't. So let's do some math here. If you invest $26 million on a $100 million asset and it grows to 500, is investing 26 and yielding 430 million, is that a good return on investment? What's that? Yeah. That's how you grow your wealth, right? And you're not going to stop Chris. Chris has a website now with fire and brimstone. I like this. He misspelled charlatans. The mayor's being hit in the head with the lightning bolt. I love that. I asked the mayor, I'm like, is this a liquor drink? She goes, it should be. You know, I talk to Chris at least twice a month, and he's always going off on stuff. Sometimes he's right. You know, every squirrel finds a nut. I get it. But it's just like, look, you got to understand the economics of this stuff. So what I found is that we have this inability to talk at a civic level. This is a kid's book that I found in a garage sale. The city, the town, and the country. This is teacher's guide, so it says T on the spine. There it is. So in this teacher's guide, this is a third grade textbook from 1959. We learn about civics, right? So in kindergarten, you learn about your house. First grade, the schools. Second grade, the neighborhood. Third grade, you learn about regional planning. Y'all have this book? In the teacher's guide, it says things like this. While patterns vary from state to state, counties are responsible. So we have counties. You all have regions, basically. Counties are responsible for education, library, health, welfare, etc. In studying the functions performed by your county, you will no doubt find there's a duplication of services and overlapping of jurisdictions and a lack of coordination between the county and the communities within it. How's that coordination going with your province? Now, you're all in it together, right? So people in my county called my city a cesspool of sin. And we're just like, yeah, we pay your taxes. You know, it's just, we're going through this at a national level, and you all are experiencing our pain. Somehow maybe you got to stop watching our TV or something, but it's happening all over the place. And we need to just aspire to a higher civic conversation in this. And let's start with the math. Let's start with facts. And it's hard for me to say that as an American. So here's a lesson plan. It's painfully white. It's also misogynistic. The girls are shoved out in the hallway for some reason. But you see what's happening here. There's a new factory gets built. There's even more kids that go to school. So in blue, this is what you ask your third graders. Give 4 good reasons for building a new school. And your third graders talk about what? Infrastructure, maybe get another teacher, equity, let's let everybody have a desk, right? On the right, you learn about Mr. Canfield. He didn't want a new school. He says our taxes are too high now. If we build a new school, we'll need more teachers and taxes will get still higher. That is indeed true. So you ask your third graders, why would some people have to pay higher taxes and why are some people against that? So here on 2 pages, we get what you all have to do on an annual basis. Balance a budget, figure out what you can afford, figure out what your community needs are, but there's a cash flow to all of this. Things cost money. But my favorite part is this. Remember, too, that many children, whether urban and rural, and regardless of region, are tragically limited in their knowledge of their world, and their world's largely the space in which they live and operate. We all have to address the fact that we're all tragically limited in our own understanding. You have tragic limitations right here in this own city. Who's up on the mountain and who's not, who's in one neighborhood or another. We only know the space in which we operate. And as we come into our community, we have to expand that to a broader civic to understand that this is a bigger system that you have to deal with. You're all in it together, whether you like it or not. And this is the challenge of your body, is to decide that and to have that conversation. But there's a challenge to all of us as citizens to take it to the higher level too, that it's our obligation to hear these other stories too, and to know this data. So for me, my city is a finite boundary of land that has to be managed. My state, if you think that your province is bad, my state, after they stole our water system and our airport, they also passed a law that we can't annex land until December 26, 2026. They just went ahead and just did that. So those land acres that we have are critically important to us. And what we really need to do is have a conversation about what cities are. This is straight out of Oxford Dictionary, to incorporate, to constitute a company, a city, or other organization as a legal corporation. So by law, this corporation, this is the board of directors right here, and it has to operate at a fiscal level, and it has to be prudent about the efficiency of that cash flow. And in my country, my city's a corporation, my county is a corporation, my state is a corporation, our country's a corporation. Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert Show. The United States is the largest corporation in the world. And I'm such a nerd at midnight, I'm looking it up. This is the US code that lists us as a federal corporation. It doesn't say we're capitalistic. It says that we are a corporate system of governance. It's a social corporation, which is no different from you all. We're just a little bit more crude about it down there. So my city at $14 billion of taxable value is 6 times the value of Ted Turner. That's the value of my corporation. That's just the taxable value. Once you put the streets and roads and water system in, now you're talking close to 30 billion. So does Ted Turner wake up every day and look at his Twitter feed or Facebook to kind of figure out how to run his corporation? Of course not. So why do we think that that's a good way to run our city? Let's raise ourselves to a higher level to understand what this means at a corporate level. So we've done this all across the country. It doesn't matter the state, it doesn't matter the province, that we see a trend, and here's how it works out. For every $1 of taxes, somebody out in the unincorporated city, out in our counties or in the region, is paying to that region. The brother and sister in the city is paying about 5 times that. Here's the Walmart, here's the mall. That's a 2-story building right there. This is a 3-story building, that's a 6-story building. So we're not talking skyscrapers. It's real simple. When you start stacking stories, you're stacking your dollar bills that produce wealth for your community. This is what our ancestors knew when they built these older places, that they were essentially being very efficient with the taxes to pay for the infrastructure. Once you step down to a 1-story, you're essentially liquidating that promise. So sometimes people see my data and they're like, dude, why do you hate Walmart? Now, if that's your takeaway from this, you're missing the point. Don't hate the player, hate the game. I was presenting at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers conference. Is there an assessor in the room? Anybody hang out with an assessor? Could you imagine 3,000 of them? It was the squarest conference I've ever been to. It makes a planning conference feel like Burning Man. It was like really weird. But super nice people, but very, very, they're like mathletes. Anyway, this guy gets up and does this amazing PowerPoint presentation as the keynote at 8 in the morning, showing spreadsheet after spreadsheet on how cheap Walmarts are. I'm watching this go down. I'm like, oh my God, this is brilliant. Think about that for a second. You've got 3,000 assessors in one room, and you're proving how cheap your buildings are. There goes all of his property tax bills, get lowered down right there. Assessors are agnostic. If it's a cheap building, it's a cheap building, right? So they're all writing the numbers down. I'm having a coronary because I'm trained as an architect. I'm like, how is he getting away with this? Don't these people care? And so I went up to the microphone and I asked him, I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he honestly shot back at me, 15 years, maybe 20. We designed the building to depreciate it as fast as possible. We'll build another building to depreciate it down again. We don't care about the buildings. They're throwaway. Some of you all have experienced that, where the big box just moves, and it just moves just a little bit further down the road. There is a tax incentive to do that. When you tax on value, there's a perverse incentive to build junk in your community, period. Is that the system you want? Is this what you decided to do? Did you all have a vote on that? No. So their commitment to your corporation is 15 years, which is the life cycle of a cat. We at least mourn the passing of the cat, right? Sorry, I'm a dog person. It's a joke. Trying to put some levity here with this stuff. It gets really depressing if I don't. So, but why don't people see this stuff? Well, we don't see this stuff because no one explains the systems to us and we just don't read them. It's our fault. So if I can show you your brain, right? You can go to a doctor's office, they can do a CAT scan of your brain or an MRI or something like that. Blue is your brainstem activity, green is your creative thought process. This isn't mysticism, right? It's called science. We can visualize that. So can I do an economic MRI of your place? Can I show you your money? This is Hennepin County, which is home to Minneapolis. Does anybody want to guess where downtown Minneapolis might be in this image? This is how you show your potency of your community. You're all in it together. So let's step back out to Asheville for a second. This is my county, 350 square miles. So this is Mount Mitchell, tallest mountain east of the Mississippi. That's a real mountain right there. This is the second tallest mountain east of the Mississippi called Mount Pisgah. Both of those are non-taxable, so they're gray. So let's just be crude about it. It's just a big park. It doesn't pay me taxes. I don't care about it, Joe. Right? It's just gray. Let's just zero it out. Low value is in green up here. Purple is high value. That big purple splotch right there is the Biltmore estate. That's America's largest house. That house is worth $100 million. When Bill Cecil, heir to the Vanderbilt fortune, shows up at one of our council meetings, we all genuflect and thank him for his time because his house is worth $100 million. I mean, who's got a $100 million house, right? But that's really not a fair way of looking at it because his house is 180,000 square feet and he's sitting on 8,000 acres of land. He's got the biggest gas tank, right? So rather than total value, here's value per acre. Let me just show it to you in 3D. So this is a tax potency of our entire region. And we can see where downtown is, right? You can see the potency of downtown. So if we're all paying 6 mils in taxes, throw a 6 mil thick blanket across this thing, where do you get your money? Now, in addition to our downtown, there are other downtowns. There's the downtown of Black Mountain over here. This is a little village of 12,000 people. You can see its downtown popping up right here, right? So this is Baby Bear. This is Mama Bear. Every city should have a region of nodes like that. Physically and cash flow perspective, you should see that in your model. And then have an informed discussion about where your wealth is coming from. This is the data, right? So we have to show this stuff to people. Don't just give me a spreadsheet and let my eyes roll into the back of the head with some bureaucratic report. Show me what's going on. But you know, that's North Carolina. Surely it's different in other states. Well, here's Manchester, New Hampshire. This is where we're holding their United States first primary tomorrow, right? Or today, is it? I guess it's today. Guess where downtown Manchester is? This is Sonoma County, California. And you can see all the different downtowns and different cities in this region and what's going on there economically. Bozeman, Montana. Bozeman, Montana has 2 buildings that are 8 stories tall that are the tallest buildings in downtown. And look what's going on with the rest of downtown. Those are only like 3-story buildings. Look at how potent that is. You don't have to be big to be potent. But you're Canadian. Canadians are indeed different. I'll say that. I love this Ontario postcard for some reason. It's somewhat weird. I don't know why you have an interchange on your O and this woman with a fish and then this girl's petting a deer for some reason. Is there something I'm missing about you guys? But anyway, we did a project in Guelph in 2013 or 14. Your tax system is kind of like a soundboard in our nightclub. Our tax system looks like that equalizer from 1970s. We have a very crude tax system. There's a pros and cons to your tax system. One is it's very sophisticated, which means you have more control, but you need to understand how to use those controls. But once you do, that's awesome for you guys. So this is Guelph. Can y'all tell where downtown Guelph is? But look at the scale and potency, because Guelph's downtown is not huge. They're not skyscraper buildings that are down there. But look at the potency that they're getting out of their downtown versus everything else. And this is another issue. They were trying to figure out whether to expand their boundary, and they were concerned about not wasting real estate. So on the right is a map of just their footprints of their buildings and their green space. So that's the stuff they care about. So they're using 30% of their city boundaries as natural environment, 10% as buildings. When you throw the roads in, that's what you got. So they have half their city is not being utilized for the things that they critically care about. And yet you're going to go and expand the boundary. Why would you? Are you using your land efficiency? Could you do better planning to sort out with that 30% that you're already running streets and roads and pipes to? How do you get more efficient with that infrastructure? Auckland, New Zealand. I don't know if y'all have been to Auckland, but they're a pretty dense place. I guess they're like their Toronto for New Zealand. But this is their tax productivity model. And you can see their transit lines running out like mountain ranges out of their downtown. And they asked what these 2 divots were. And we're like, well, that first divot up here is a lake. The second divot here is a highway interchange. And what was crazy was their response. So this was like September. By January or February, they're like, look, we want to get rid of that divot right there. We want to fix this finger that comes out, so we have one here. They're looking economically. These are the residential neighborhoods between the transit corridors. They wanted to extract more wealth out of those corridors. So we're like, all right, we'll work with you. So they looked at this interchange. That's all, that stuff in yellow is right of way. So it's all non-tax paying. And it's a highway interchange that's totally unnecessary. They already have another highway further west over here. They're like, yeah, let's just get rid of this. So filling in that hole, they drew up some buildings, and we followed behind them and put sticker prices on it to figure out what the taxes would be if they do this project. So there's the hole in the fabric. If they do nothing, they're like Toronto. If you do nothing in Toronto, the momentum of economics that are going on in that place are going to keep on rising because of what it is. It's a machine that's producing wealth at this point. Same is true in San Francisco and in Auckland. But if you fill the hole in, of course, you're going to be adding value. So here's the taxes you get today. They will grow up. But if you fill the hole in, this is what you get. So you can actually harvest in 20 years' time, $80 million new taxes just in that one little area. So they're like, great, yeah, let's tear it down. Let's move on to another project. Like, that's the speed at which they move. It's kind of insane. But they're harvesting wealth. They're making a judgment call. Is it really worth it for us to have this one freeway loop that really doesn't give us a benefit? We're paying money for this thing. Let's get rid of it. So it's like thinking of things like little surgical moves inside your city that you can do, like an acupuncture, to grow your wealth in your community. And some people say to me, like, you just want to have big buildings everywhere. You want to have skyscrapers. And it's like, okay, let's take a look at this for a second. So Charleston, South Carolina. Do y'all know Charleston? Charleston is like the South version of Boston. It's a very old city. When we were doing the model, we were joking around with them. We're like, you didn't make the ocean, so we're going to go ahead and get rid of that value. Somebody else made the ocean, not you. This is what humans made. But they're an old place. They actually predate the Declaration of Independence. So this is the birth date of my country right here. There we go. We know our birth date. Here's a building built in 1686. Incidentally, it's called the Red Dot Liquor Store. It's the oldest liquor store in the entire country. It's been a continuously operating liquor store, except for 20 years when they called it something else, but it still sold liquor. Here's a revolutionary getting his drink on. So here are all those buildings that predate our country. Here they are. Here they are in plan. So 21 acres. This is what they paid in regional taxes, the county taxes in 2015, $630,000, right? They paid city taxes and BIA taxes or bid taxes on top of that. This is what the county got, right? Out in the county is this Walmart. It's about 21 acres. This is what it paid the same year. So those buildings, they're 240 years old. They're only 2-story buildings, have produced 13 times the tax flow. They've survived half a dozen wars, a bunch of hurricanes, a bunch of fires, and even an earthquake, and they're still producing this wealth. This Walmart was born in 2005. It's going to be gone by 2025. What's producing wealth in your community? What are you leaving as a legacy for your kids and your grandkids? Is this the decision that you want to have? Are you even having this conversation? Sometimes people say, well, what about retail? Like, retail doesn't matter for you all because the province gets most of that, but in a place like Minnesota, they're super awesome. They have plenty of data. They also have Mall of America. So here's Mall of America, biggest mall in their entire country. That's its retail production. It is a monolithically retail environment. And when my analyst was doing this, I was like, Josh, what's going on with downtown Minneapolis? He's like, oh, it's up over here. So this is downtown Minneapolis versus Mall of America in retail production. So not only is it killing it from a taxable basis from property taxes, it's producing more retail, it's producing more jobs, it's producing more wealth. These things called downtowns are incredible economic machines to produce wealth for the region. Understand that. Know what it takes to cultivate that. This is your golden goose. You can't just make pate out of it. You've got to get those eggs by feeding the goose. Does that make sense? Is this too nerdy for you guys? We okay still? Just checking in. Sometimes, this is one of my favorite stories. This is Gwinnett County, Georgia. Like, sometimes people tell me, they're like, Joe, I don't want density. We're America. We want to stretch out. I don't want to have density. We're not European, right? All right. Gwinnett County, Georgia. I don't know if you know Gwinnett County, Georgia. It's outside of Atlanta. It's a suburb. Lawrenceville is the county seat. And I'm seriously not making this up. The Chamber of Commerce was our client, and they gave me strict orders when I went down there. I was not allowed to say 4 words. This is the way the South operates. They're going to go ahead and tell you what you can't say. And I was like, all right. So the 4 words I was not allowed to say, these were dirty words. I couldn't say the word urban. I couldn't say the word city. I couldn't say the word town. I couldn't say the word municipal. And I'm like, okay, why? And they're like, well, we're rural people here. We're not part of the Beltway. We're not part of that sugar. Look, we're not part of the city part. We're rural people. So what do I say about my company? Am I just 3? Okay. So here they are outside the Beltway. And I called up my client. I was like, Kelly, y'all are 812,000 people. 812,000 people in your county. And she goes, yeah, but honey, look, we're 460 square miles. We're huge. Okay, I can do math. When you divide people into area, that's called density, right? So this is their people. Each of these people is 100 people. They are 1,900 people per square mile in density, which is less dense than DeKalb, Georgia. But we had all of this other numbers, so I put it out there. I'm like, look, you guys are 200 people denser than Mecklenburg, North Carolina. What's in Mecklenburg, North Carolina? Charlotte. Y'all have heard of Charlotte, right? How did you get denser and not produce a Charlotte? I ain't never heard of Lawrenceville. And then this is Nashville, Tennessee. You've heard of Nashville. Both of these places have a professional football team. Heck, these people have a hockey team on top of that. There's no such thing as a hockey team called the Gwinnett County Trailblazers or something. No. This is Austin, Texas. You're double the density of them. This is Raleigh. This is Asheville. This is Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So whatever you've been telling yourself, that's great. But then there's truth. There's data. You're not rural. So we did their model. And as Josh was doing this, I'm like, could you turn it on its side? It looks like a 1970s shag carpet. It's like the same thing all the way across the model. This is the most potent building right there. And this is what we typically see. This is why I was freaked out. And I could see in this county, I could see 3 different places: Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and Hillsboro. I could see downtown, downtown, downtown. This is some new urbanism. And this is the residential districts. That's the fact. This is what you got. So this is the most potent building in your entire county of 812,000 people. Your great-grandparents left it for you. That's it. That's your pinnacle of achievement at $8 million an acre. All these places to the left of you are less dense and more productive. That's a fact. So just to kind of rub it in, we made a little heart monitor, and we put 3 counties at the same scale. So we've got Davidson County, which is Nashville, Travis County, which is Austin, and Gwinnett County and Lawrenceville, and we kind of ran a heart monitor to see how it looks. And there you go. So we've got a peak value of 192 million here. We've got a peak value of 476, and y'all are flatlining at 8. And this one city councilor or county commissioner said to me, she goes, but we're not urban. I said, ma'am, I never called you urban. I said, look, this is the data of what you have. These are choices that you made. You have all of the horizontal infrastructure of this place, but none of the vertical stuff to pay for it. Are you guys broke yet? And she goes, oh, yeah, we're broke. And then she continued. She goes, but we're not urban. I said, ma'am, I never called you urban. I called you dense. So some communities are like, well, you know, we're growing. We're fine, Joe. This is all doom and gloom. It's like, all right. Lafayette, Louisiana. We did this project with Chuck Marone. I highly recommend you all to read Strong Towns, to look at Chuck's work. Chuck's a civil engineer. So he's thinking about the cost of the roads. We worry about where the money comes from, and we're going to do an ROI model, return on investment, to see if you pay for the roads, what's paying for it, right? Lafayette, Cajun people are hilarious. I don't know if you all know Cajuns, know any Cajun people. They're Canadians. You should know them. This is the cover of their budget document from 1994. Do you think the finance officer was sending a message about the state of affairs of government with this? You don't have to read the document. You just look at the cover. This is the government about to get hit by a tsunami. By the way, I love that the government's in a onesie. Isn't that cool? And about to get eaten by a shark. Now, what do you think the elected officials did when they were faced with this grave information? Kick the can down the road. The next year, the finance officer, to her credit, she's like, hey, y'all, we're still screwed. And then the third year, they did this joint city-county government, and we're like, what are you doing? Here you are 20 years later in 2016, and you're still broke. It took you 20 years to collapse the city down into the hole that the county was in. So any largesse that the city had, you just vaporized it. Like, what did you do? Did you fire the artist from the first 2 years and go to Microsoft Clip Art? Was that your savings? So here's your tax model. Here's your downtown. This is some new urbanism, and you spread out into the swamps. When you do that, it's super expensive to fight Mother Nature. So things like pavement, and I don't know if you all know this, but pavement, pipes, roads, they're all geospatial, and they connect you to property. So we started going through the roads, figuring out who's using which road, and we're like, okay, so there's like 10 people at the end of this cul-de-sac right here. Those people should pay for that damn cul-de-sac. It's not a network. It's not part of the road system. It's private. There's only 14 people on it. That's a publicly funded driveway. Or choose whether or not you can afford it. But we're going to figure out what that cost is. As we're talking about these roads and how they're used, I kid you not, one of the city councilors said this to me. It's not where you live. It's what you believe. What does that even mean? I believe I look like Brad Pitt. Sooner or later, I got to walk by a mirror and see that that's not true, right? Now, again, they're Cajuns, so the public works director responded to this statement by saying this. There's no such thing as an infrastructure fairy. He goes, look, I got $250,000 to chip and seal roads. You all pick whichever quarter mile you want. That's all you're getting. That's all the money I got. That's all you're getting. And I love this. On his business card, it said the world's greatest public works director. So we photoshopped Kevin in on this one. So this is Kevin, the infrastructure fairy. And Kevin's like, just explain it to us what the problem is. So here's the deal. When I, as a developer, build you a pipe, a road, a sidewalk, when it goes into your municipal budget, I give it to you, right? It's not a gift. It's a liability into the future. But when we put it in our books, we put it in as an asset, right? In my world, in business, my computer is an asset, this thing right here. If I had delivery vehicles, those are assets. If I had real estate, those are assets. So we sat down with the finance officer and we said, Lori, I can sell you my computer, a delivery vehicle, or a building. Can you pick your roads up and sell them to Baton Rouge? Can you all sell your roads to Guelph? No. That's a permanent liability. And if you thought of your roads and infrastructure as that true liability, you'd think about them differently. So in my world in real estate, when we have, like, let's say this building right here that we're all in, this is a public liability. You have to fix the air conditioner, you have to fix the windows, you have to clean the floors. There's things that you have to do in perpetuity. And if you have an air conditioner on this building, you better set up a reserve account because that air conditioner has a useful life. Roads have a useful life. You know this as a civil engineer. So you have to squirrel away money for when that payment comes due. So on the right is their liability load of the roads that they're carrying. In blue is the actual money that they have. Let me ask you a super complex municipal finance question. Do you have enough blue to pay for the red? No. So it's 18 times the load. Now, the crazy thing is they went out to the bond market, like, hey, we can get a bond to pay for our roads. It's like, that's like taking out a credit card to pay for your mortgage. You still got to pay off the bond. And in fact, what's even dirtier is the bonds get first right of refusal on your money. So they can come in and take their money out before you get it. So they're actually skimming off the top half your revenue that you think you have. So you only have $25 million to pay for $1 billion. So we floated the whole city in a lake and sent everybody a bill for where they live. That's the sunk cost of all the development patterns in red. Green is the actual money that people pay. Like, we're not passing judgment. You just need to see the cash flow. So we're going to net your costs against your revenues, right? Subtract your costs against your revenues. So what's in the black and what's in the red? Here's the whole county in 3D. So you can see where they're bleeding the money all over the place. And if you take this thing and drop it on the floor so everything pops up vertical, this is what it looks like. And if there's anybody colorblind, this is the colorblind model. But they told me, they're like, Joe, look, people really want to live out here. And I said, well, hell yeah. That's what you're paying people to move out there. That's called a subsidy. I'm not going to pass judgment on it, but y'all need to write that down and figure out whether you can afford it. There's other things inside this model that are mind-blowing. I don't know if you spend time in the South, in particular like Louisiana, not exactly the most supportive of different ethnicities and races, even though that it's in the South. But there's a highway that cuts through town right here, and you can see the white scar right there. On the other side of the highway is a train track. So you can imagine the neighborhood in the South that's across a train track and a highway from downtown right here. That would be one of the poorest neighborhoods I've ever seen. And you can see that neighborhood right here is net neutral. How is a poor neighborhood coming in net neutral? Because they don't pay a lot of taxes, but they're also highly efficient on their infrastructure. So let's get past our biases of what we think people produce. Let's be agnostic about what we think is happening in the city and look at data and then have a discussion about it. But the crazy thing is, in 1950, they had 5 feet of pipe per person and 2.4 fire hydrants per 1,000. They grew their population to 121,000. This is the amount of feet of pipe per person they have now and fire hydrants per 1,000. So they grew their population 350%. They grew their liability 1,000 and 2,000%. And they told me, they're like, look, Joe, we got oil money out of the Gulf. We're rich now. We have oil money. So we adjusted their household income. This is adjusted for today's dollars. This is what they're worth back then. Here's what they are now. They actually did get rich. They're richer than we are in Asheville, but that's only 160% growth in revenue. 160% growth in revenue, 1,000 and 2,000% growth in liability. You know what's scary about this? They're not alone. Almost every city that we look at has the same problem, and it's a matter of when we grew. So if you're not measuring this stuff, you can't manage it. If you're not even asking these questions, you have no idea what's really happening. And we have to get past that. Surely, this is all, y'all get quiet. Is this too depressing? It gets worse. So Lancaster, California, up and over the mountain from Los Angeles, here they are. They grew up at the wrong time. There are 166,000 people. Their tallest building downtown is 3 stories. You can spot it in the model. But the crazy thing is they have 953 miles of roads. So these are the roads that they all have now, and they own them now. That's enough roads to go from Los Angeles to Portland. Do y'all know how many miles of roads you got? That should be a number at the tip of your tongue. You should know what you own. But we put them on a timeline. So their great-grandparents went on a little road building spree in 1910. And then they went to sleep until after World War II. And you all, like us, I mean, we did it worse than you, but when we came back from the war, no one bombed our cities, right? We came back from World War II with our manufacturing intact, and what did we do? We put ourselves back to work. We made tons of money, and we were 20 years ahead of anything else on the planet. We had incredible wealth in the 1950s, and what did we invest it in? Roads. So look at all the roads that they built in the 1950s, and particularly 1953 when they just went a little crazy and did all of those lane miles. Well, guess what? When your grandparents did that, that comes back to haunt your parents' generation in 1983. And when you're hit with this huge capital expense, what are you incented to do? You got to pay for it, right? So we need money. We need to let out development. Let's go annex more land. Let's get more development. Let's go from farm field to housing or something like that. That's an immediate injection in cash. It's a sugar high. Well, it brings along with it new roads, right? So this brings with it the second rebuild of this infrastructure and the new stuff you just put down. So we stopped them in 2015. We said, you're not going to build another road from here to infinity. Let's just look at your build-rebuild cycle of just what you're carrying. This is what it looks like. So that first wave was just kind of stupid. And if you pull any literature from the 1950s, no one was penciling out the long-term effects of this decision. We just decided to modernize, and we said it was going to be good for us. We never wrote anything down. And then in the 1980s, we just went ahead and repeated it. Even though we knew it wasn't right, we were addicted to the pattern at this point. We convinced ourselves we're different. This is who we are. We like cars in America, Joe. Okay. Now it's getting bigger and bigger, and I'm not even adding more roads. This is the capital expense. This is the discussions that you all are having right now and every city are going through. This is the tough road to hoe for all of us into the future. And it's our challenge in the communities to understand this is what's going on. And we need to be literate about this stuff. They can only afford 50% of their roads. That's it. That's the situation they're in. You can't make the money happen, or you can raise everybody's taxes. But you have to understand the sustainability of this. This is a paradigm that we've been going through. Okay. I understand it's depressing. Eugene, Oregon, this is their model, above the water and below the water, in their net model. This is the top of their model. If you lift this up and look like you're looking for a salamander under a rock, this is what it looks like. And you can see the subsidy spread across the model. Like I said, we're all in this. We all have these same problems. And they wanted to know how this was happening. So we broke down their building types. We call this the Brady Bunch slide, but this is residential, mixed use, and commercial, low density, medium density, high density. This is the sticker price. This is the reality of our choices. The American single family house, or that typology, it's in your country too. The single family, low density, spread out architecture costs about $1,400 an acre net loss in that typology. I got it. This isn't new. This is all information that we've had in our system since the 60s, and that's the reality. But I understand you want a house. I want to be 6 foot tall and have a full head of hair. I think you should pay for that. Like, we all want lots of things. Can you afford it? So when you do 80% of your land use is in that subsidy, that's a recipe for disaster. Maybe you need to balance it out a little bit, do a little bit more density, work on a downtown, or do something that adds value. So when you look at the model, it's actually telling you what to do. So one is you want to fill in your downtown a little bit more, but check this out in Crescent Village, that little bump right there. And you all have this in your neighboring, when you get up on the escarpment and you see these villages, you have them. So grow up their little downtowns, or maybe work on some more out there and raise everybody's wealth to be able to afford that pattern that you want to have. But you have to figure out where you're going to get your money, because you can't keep losing money and get your way out of this. So in Leander, Texas, how am I doing on time, by the way? We good? Leander, Texas, I don't know if you know Texas. Texas is crazy. I mean, our country's crazy enough, but Texas puts it to a new level. This is Austin, Texas. They ran a train line out to Leander. So Leander's probably about 40 minutes outside of Austin. And the region just went ahead and paid for a train station. So here's the train station. And the people in Leander are just like, screw it. They just drop a box next to it. This is a grocery store with a big car park in front of it. And they basically ignored it. The region, however, is invested in a college. A developer came in and wanted to do a 100-acre village right there with a main street, apartments next to the campus, and then a bunch of townhouses next to the train station. And then the downtown is kind of up here. It's a little asymmetrical. So the developer was asking for a $20 million investment in tax increment. Basically, will you and the community forego $20 million as a cooperative investment with us so that we can carry the cost of this land, because it takes a while to start selling things to pay for the project, right? So they were asking us to evaluate that on behalf of the city. So we're like, fair enough. It doesn't happen overnight. So first the developer is going to build the Main Street spine on the left, and then they're going to start to grow outward to the west and east and to fill out the village. It'll take about 25 years to do, and it'll yield a value of $700 million. So here's their current valuation. This is currently what they're producing. And I said to them, I said, look, in your defense, you don't have a downtown. You're just basically a suburb that never really grew anything. You're just mostly single-family housing and strip malls. But here's phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. It's a totally different animal, and it's going to produce a lot of wealth for you. But that's your bet. Is it worth the $20 million investment to yield that result? So unlike your cousins of Georgetown and Round Rock, they've been around since the 1800s. They both have downtowns. You can see them in the model, there and there, right? So you'll be adding yours right there, boom. What's crazy is it takes the average value of the entire city from $275,000 an acre to $500,000, and it still saves a lot of land in the community to continue to grow. This is a fiscally prudent investment. And this is what you're giving away right here, this light blue triangle. And a couple of people in the community, it was kind of disappointing because they're just like, it's just a tax giveaway. You're just giving money to a developer. It's like, that's not totally fair. You're giving some money, but the developer's going to start paying taxes almost immediately. So you see the dark blue triangle right here. So we just snapped a line through here in around 2028, and we showed them, or 2025, this is them paying partial taxes right here. This is what they'll eventually fill up. So we made it like a thermometer so they could see it, right? So even at partial tax payment, it still crushes everything else in the community. Is that still a bad deal? Now, 2 of the city councilors were just like, to hell with that. I just want a Costco and a Target. I don't want to get in the way of this. I don't want, let the market take care of it. This is what the market wants. Like, all right. So here's what the offer is. We went ahead and ran the Costco and the Target. That's what it looks like. So you could have, I don't know, $600 million or 700. Do you want to invest 20 and get 700, or do you want to get 60, or do you want 700? It's your call. They ended up voting 5-2 in favor of it. The 2 councilors that were against it never changed their opinion. This facts didn't change their mind. One of the councilors actually insinuated that she was a commercial real estate broker, and she was upset that she wasn't in on the deal. That's why she's voting against it. And I was like, what? Welcome to Texas. So incentives. There's incentives baked into the system. I just want you to see some of these things. I'm just going to go through a couple of them. This is a map where we took the buildings off the dirt and just threw the buildings away. This is just a dirt value per acre, right? There's no buildings in this image. So if you look in the upper left up here, this is all looks normal. So if you lived in this neighborhood, this looks cool, right? That seems reasonable. But look what's going on in this neighborhood where you see all of this helter-skelter, different colors in here. That shouldn't be that way. And that's because no one's double-checking the math. No one's verifying whether or not it's equitable. But putting all that aside, my favorite thing was this right here. You see this big blue splotch right there? And so that's $15,000 an acre. And when you cross the street, it turns bright orange to $40,000. So you go from $15,000 to $40,000 in the same zoning district. Land doubles in value. Y'all follow me? So I was presenting at 8 in the morning. I was like, does anybody know why land doubles in value when you cross the street in the same zoning category? Anyone? The tax assessor was sitting in the front row, and she raised her hand. And she goes, no, you don't understand. And I was like, what am I missing? She goes, well, these people have more land. The more land you have, the lower the value. Does that make sense to anybody? The mayor started laughing so hard, he almost spat his coffee out. And I'm like, really? I get more land, you give me a discount? And she goes, yeah, that's our standard. I'm like, okay, this fella over here has 3 miles of frontage around him. This person here only has 200 feet. She goes, yeah, we don't count infrastructure as the valuation. So your money that you put into the ground, you don't want that back? And she goes, no, that's not part of our standard. So it was fun. This is the reason why I was at the assessors conference. Their magazine is called Fair and Equitable. So I asked them, how is this fair And how is it equitable? Now, what was fun is, to their credit, they're like, it's not. I'm like, where did this come from? They're like, we don't know. You need to talk to Larry. I'm like, Larry who? And like, Larry Clark. So I tracked this guy down in the hallway, this like massive nerd. He's super awesome. And by the way, Larry thought this was funny. I'm like, Larry, where did this come from? Did Moses deliver this to you? And he's like, I don't know. You know, now that you brought this up, it's not fair, it's not equitable, we probably need to change it. It's probably something that came from England when we all traveled across the ocean. We had this legacy effect, has to do probably with agricultural policy, but now that you point that out, it's not fair, it's not equitable. If you think there's some adult that's kind of thought this stuff through, you got another thing coming. And so what's going to happen with the market? If you're going to give me this discount, what am I going to do? I'm going to take advantage of it. If you're not watching what's happening out there in the marketplace, you're not seeing how you're hemorrhaging your money. And that's all I care about, is that you write it down and make it a choice. It's your community. It's your corporation. Is this the best deal for you all? So Peoria, Illinois told us they had a parking problem. Here's their water. Here's their green space. Here's their streets and sidewalks. This is all their surface parking downtown. These are their buildings. And of these buildings, these are all parking decks. So I'm like, I don't know. I'm just a data guy. Looks like you got a lot of parking. Maybe it's a perception problem. I don't know. But clearly you have some parking. Now, when I build this as a developer in your community, your tax assessor is following me, right? So this is the average Peorian. Here she is. This is the amount of buildings she has dedicated to her and the amount of parking she has dedicated to her. So countywide, she has 3 parking spaces dedicated to her. Now, when this gets built, there is a value for the building, right? There's a value for the parking. These are their numbers. How is your parking valued? You know, just go across the street over here. You'll see surface parking. What's that paying in taxes? Run the numbers on that. So the road's going to cost you $22 a square foot in front of the building and in front of the parking, right? So that's your cost. The taxes off those 2 properties. So let's go ahead and put all the taxes, 2% that comes off that building, into a savings account and see how long it takes to pay off that road. Well, that's going to be 32 years. What's the useful life of a road? 50? So they're getting close. That's no taxes to the police department, no taxes to the fire department, no taxes to schools. This is all the taxes just going straight to a sunk fund for the roads. The parking is going to take you 786 years to recoup the cost. Have you ever seen a road last 786 years? It's crazy. This is our system, folks. You've got the same thing in your community. So when you see the model of the downtown and it stops in the core area, it's usually because there's a choker collar of parking all around it that stops it. When you go out to the burbs and you see how flat they are, it's because there's a lot of parking out there. It's real simple. So if you say, look, it's too difficult for me to drive somewhere, I need a better parking space. I don't want to pay for parking. Well, then it gets baked into your system this way, and you end up paying for it one way or the other. So we did the whole county this way. This is, if you take all the buildings in the county and shove them together, that's how much building footprint you need for an entire county's worth of building. Why would you waste all the rest of that land? But I understand I'm not from Amsterdam. I don't want to live so close to you. We want to stretch out a little bit. When you stretch out, you need parking and roads, right? So this is how much square miles they have of each. They actually have more land dedicated to parking than buildings, and this is their liability. This is everything else. When you look at the numbers, this is what you see. Let me do it on a per square mile basis. They're getting $1 billion a square mile out of their buildings. Their parking's only pulling $40 million. Their roads cost them $250 million a square mile. This is everything else. The first question we should ask ourselves is, why doesn't the parking cost or parking value match the cost of your roads? We know who's using both of them. That would be cars. So what ends up happening is, the more you drive, the more you put that space for your car, you're robbing from some other fund. Would you choose to have more surface parking or send all of your kids to MIT for a summer camp? Like, what would you do with a public investment? And make sure you're doing that cost analysis. But basically, they have enough roads to go from Vancouver, or from Peoria to Vancouver. This is what they get to rebuild every 50 years. So this is all just spatial analysis. This is all that we're doing here. This joke only works for people over the age of 35. I figured that out the hard way. Let me just Let me just close with something about equity. You know, there's inequity baked into our system that we're not even seeing, and I'll show you one of my favorite examples. This is Florida. I used to work in Florida. I don't know if y'all hang out in Florida, but it's very vapid. They love their rich people. This is the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel bragging about these mansions that pay multi-million dollars in taxes and stuff like that. And here are their tax bills. So you look at all of these mansions. This one's paying $1 million. This one's paying $1.5 million in property taxes. I love that there's two mansions because you don't want to be in the same mansion with your partner. You want to move them across the street over here. This mansion's got a golf course because you know you need a golf course on the ocean, right? Now, you know me by now. I'm an apples to apples guy. Rather than total value, let's do value per or taxes per acre, and let's rearrange them based on potency. So the smallest one is actually the most potent. The guy with the golf course is the least potent, right? The double mansion is somewhere in the middle. Okay, let's go from I'm sure you all aren't the 1%ers. Let's go from the 1%ers down to the schlubs like us, the multi-dollar mansions, right? The regular people, this is in Delray Beach, and this is in one of the poor African-American neighborhoods. I used to be the zoning administrator in this community, and she's paying about $1,000 in taxes. But again, this isn't fair to look at that number that way because her house is the size of a parking space, right? So per acre, these are the numbers. Now, let's just take this guy in the middle right here. So he's actually more productive than the one with the golf course on the ocean. Would you have thought that? He doesn't have an ocean view. He doesn't even have a place for his jacuzzi. It's like in the parking space right there. What's even crazier is he doesn't even have a street. He's got this thing called Mango Promenade that's literally a sidewalk through his block. So low infrastructure cost and pretty productive. Why don't we do more of that? Or things like this. These are townhouses at $5,000, $8,000 in taxes per acre. They're crushing it. This is that double mansion, right? This is usually where I stop the show, but just for fun, because you know this guy, our Medal of Honor recipient. So Rush gets a taxable, this is his tax market value, right? So if you pull your tax bill, none of us are taxed to full market value, right? We all get a little discount. So he gets a 50% haircut from his market value to his taxable value, right? That's the tax system. Follow me? Let's go look at her. What do you think her haircut is? Does that seem remotely fair to you? Just numbers. It's just math. How did this happen? You know the crazy thing about her tax bill? Look at her tax bill. $33,000 an acre or $32,000 an acre is more tax productive than Mar-a-Lago. How did that happen? What kind of tax equity is here? Why aren't we looking at these numbers? So, I got to give you something. I want to thank you for tweeting. This was my reaction when this happened because I knew this would happen. And I was watching these all weekend. This one's my favorite. If you fix the potholes properly, you won't have to. So, okay, someone's partially on the right trail. And then this radio show that you all did, it was actually real fun to listen to. And I have to say, I wish I had one pinky full of civic engagement that your community has. Your Raise the Hammer blog, this radio show, the conversations that I've been experiencing throughout this. I know it can get depressing and frustrating what happens in this community, but you have to realize you actually have some amazing stuff going on. And I thought it was terribly ironic that you have canceling the LRT and bullying on the same panel. But for me, it was like, how do I look at this? What do I know about your community? Well, I pulled all of these old postcards of your streetcars. And this is your streetcar routes from 1930. And there's these incredible moments in your town. And so think of it this way. Your infrastructure are your bones that the meat, the urbanism, is attached to. So there was a time when you had this kind of transit system that produced this density and wealth and supported it, right? I get it. I love this postcard. This to me is so Canada. It's like, this is this bleak scene in 1903 of running a streetcar through the snow, but I like that it's called the beach. That's kind of cool. Anyway, here's your LRT line. This is what you proposed. This is what your great-grandparents had built in your community by comparison. That's the streetcars that you used to have. And yes, I know that some of these were replaced by buses, but this is physical, solid infrastructure that was in the ground that developers would build upon, right? So looking at them side by side, this is what you proposed to build in your LRT. This is what you had in 1933 by size comparison. You had 3 times the physical infrastructure in 1933. The argument should be made to your province that, like, look, we're just trying to get partially back to where we were. That's our investment. And I know a lot of that's politics and out of your control, and someone pulled a trigger, but you have to find a way to move forward in geo-account. So we call this geo-accounting. Just your accountant doesn't care if you buy a boat, right? Your accountant cares if you can afford a boat. So you have to talk about the investment potential in your community to add value to your community so the whole community has more money to work with. That's the opportunity that's in the LRT, and you should have that in your presentation. We like to say if you put it on a map, people can see it. So just make it so that you can see this stuff. Read this book. This is Chuck's book from Strong Towns. I highly recommend his blog as well, and do your math. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. That was just absolutely fantastic. That's right. So we do have some time with Joe to go through a Q&A session. So if you do have a question, you just need to come down to the mic. We are recording video of the presentation, so you got to ask your question here, and Joe will answer from the podium there. So your voice will be on the record, but not video. So does anybody want to kick us off? Address the question of civic engagement.
Yeah, civic engagement. Well, one is, in my community, I'm totally off Facebook. I just don't even bother because it's become echo chambers where people want to rant at each other and pick on each other rather than talk about the civic object of what we're talking about in the city, or how to capitalize or fund affordable housing. Affordable housing doesn't happen in the private sector just because somebody just wants to do that. There's a rare developer that will do that, but development has to make money to stay in business, and you have to ultimately pay for land to get it. That's where the affordability issue is. Actually, there's one of my favorite stories of that. Let's see if I've got it in here. Do y'all know Henry George or land value taxation? Henry George was a tax economist from the 1800s, and he had this concept that you shouldn't charge buildings. You should charge based on infrastructure. And it spurred a movement in the 1800s. If you could think of what was going on the East Coast in particular, with all of the boats coming from Europe and just dropping a bunch of people in all of our cities, and the flood of what happened from real estate's perspective. So Henry thought it was patently wrong that you could be the Copleys in Boston and just sit on land. Meanwhile, the community needs are going up all around you, and because of how you're using land, everybody else is picking up the tab and you're paying low taxes. He thought that was wrong. He thought we should flip taxation on its head and tax you based on how you're serviced in the community. And then if you want to choose to not build on the real estate, you're still going to pay a higher tax, and then we could use that money for affordable housing or community needs that are necessary. Well, anyway, this woman, Elizabeth Maggie Phillips, who has spectacular eyebrows, she was a Georgist, and she thought, you know what, I'm not going to work with adults because it's too difficult for adults to see the bigger picture economically. I'm going to work with kids. And so she invented a board game to teach us land value economics. Y'all recognize the board game? It's Monopoly. What are the rules of Monopoly? Location, 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 land assembly, and you put some buildings on it. That's how you win the game. So she was teaching us the basics of city making, and somehow when we get older, we just lose that. And this is the level of civic engagement that I would argue for, is that we need to be literate about all of these things that are out there and have a conversation. People's feelings or what people say to each other, I don't know how to change that. And I think we all owe it to ourselves to take the high road in things and aspire for more learning about our places.
Do you build the LRT and then they will come? Like, how do we prove this to the province? Or do we build it, do we build the infrastructure and all the buildings and the density to help fund that and then say, oh, great, now we have a case? So which one is it first? Is it the LRT and the infrastructure first, or the density first?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, I put the streetcar system back up there because the way that those systems operated, typically what you find, and the reason why I show that picture of this is my downtown and here it is 15 years later, when I show that in Asheville, I show that to reinforce community change. That our community didn't start with these 1920s buildings, because now we're in a situation in Asheville where people are like, pull up the drawbridges, shut the door, let's not change, this is the perfect Asheville. And cities can't have that. Cities are evolving places. And if you look, and I say to people, I'm like, so you're a real preservationist? Let's go back to, let's see. I have to show the picture. So people love this Asheville. We had the second streetcar line in the entire country. We were the second largest city in North Carolina. We were bigger than Charlotte and Raleigh by the time the Depression hit. But we evolved from that. And there was a time with this is what you had as cities were congested in a certain area, and they just tore down and built up and tore down and built up and eventually evolved into things like this. And we've lost this ability to see that development pattern. So could we go back to this? Could we evolve a density and do incremental infill where the density eventually becomes desirable enough to have that mass transit? You could. You could also put the infrastructure down like your cousins further up the Golden Horseshoe. I'm going to Brampton tomorrow to do a talk, and they don't have nearly as cool a downtown you have, yet they've got more people, and now they're trying to figure out, well, how do we do a downtown? So they put the infrastructure in, and now they're trying to think it through. Is that going to work? They don't really have another option because they've built up. In Gwinnett County's case, the Georgia example that I showed you, now they're starting to figure out how to densify, which is the wrong way to do it. They've already done all of this development pattern, and now they've got to figure out how to densify a suburbia. That's like putting all your furniture in the house and then deciding you want carpet. It gets expensive. So it's going to be expensive to put this transit system in today, more so tomorrow, more so the year after that. Now, if you're harvesting enough wealth and taxes to do that, go for it. If you have the ability to leverage your investment to put the transit system in, it could draw more development. I would talk to your local developers and ask them. I know that if I move into an urban environment, I want the benefit of the public realm, because when you buy into an urban environment, you're sacrificing your private realm for a public realm. Does that make sense? When you're in a suburban environment, you get a maximum private realm. When you're in an urban environment, it flips. You're taking a smaller square footage space. You're sacrificing having a yard and a dog, and all, unless you get like one of those little dogs that you can take around with you. But you're making many life cycle sacrifice to buy into a public realm. So, you'll hear from the urban environment is, I don't want to walk on a sidewalk that's all broken. Like, why don't my sidewalks get plowed? Everybody else's roads get plowed. Why is my mobility option not met with equal return on investment? So it's not easy. Cities are not easy, but you have to go into it at that level. I'm of the attitude of try, iterate, make small investments, small moves, and see where you go. But there was a promise that you had from your province to do a bigger investment, and they took that away. I get that. That wasn't cool, but now what? So do you get a second bite at the apple? Could you all write letters to your provincial officials and say, stop playing games with our community? We're owed the same commensurate investment that our brothers and sisters up the horseshoe have gotten. And I would hold them to it.
Thank you.
Hi. I was particularly struck by the slide you showed of Auckland, and it's not a regional bias. And I was just wondering if the spurs that you could see of density and value coming out from the downtown, I think I understood that those were their rail lines, or are those roads? And what the difference between whether it's light rail or heavy rail, what that, as opposed to what you showed in the liability for roads and for parking, what the value is in rail comparatively?
It depends. There's not a monolithic answer to that. But if you talk to developers, they're going to advocate for the rail investment or that physical product because there's a different feeling that comes from rail travel than a bus, right? So they know that. They know that there's more guarantee to the prospective homeowners or renters that this is going to be a fixed investment at their front door. So there's certainty that that's going to be there. A bus could move, right? And that's kind of, as far as these fingers that come out of Auckland, it's a mix of everything. There's buses, there's bus rapid transit, there's rail, there's light rail. They have the whole suite of systems. I tend to think of cities as like, let's see if I have it in here. The last time I was here, I did this presentation. Sorry. Cities are places in time, and I don't have the picture here. But if you want to see what I looked like when I was 3 months old, you know, I look at myself when I was 3 months old, but I also look at a picture of my grandfather, and I'll be my grandfather someday. There's habits that I can't change. So when you look at Hamilton, and I showed you postcards of when you were a teenager and you had a streetcar line, and now here you are, you're in your 50s, let's say. Who's your grandfather? What is Hamilton going to be when it grows up? Can you look at a model of another place that has these different transit systems? Looking at Auckland is a good example, but Auckland's a huge city at this point. You've got a massive city just up the way here in Toronto. There are things that are great about Toronto, and there are things that are horrendous about Toronto. The same way there's things that are great and horrendous about my parents, right? And the older I get, there's things that freak me out that I'm becoming my parents in, right? So cities have that same kind of organic growth to them. So I would say try as many different transit systems as you can. Talk to folks in the community, but also think about equity of investment. That building these highways are also super, super expensive too. And right now you've got a lot of that, but what about the other side? Does that make sense? Did I get close to your answer? Okay.
Regarding the type of housing we're looking at, I'm very interested in small homes and also in infill and what they call the missing homes, the homes where the lots are small, awkward, uncomfortable. The city's starting to try and have the laneway housing now. How do you see that versus the really big buildings as a way of meeting that density requirements in existing cities?
Yeah, it's as far as small homes, tiny houses, you should definitely read Chuck's book because what's funny is he goes, you know, there was a day we just called those houses.
That's true.
Right? Where was I? I was with, I was just up James Street and just walked, it's St. James coffee shop, and there's a parking lot across the street, just out a block and over. Mm-hmm. Go stand in that parking lot and look back across the street. You'll see this house that's the size of this table. Like, you have tiny houses all over your community. This is how you thickened up back in the day. These are your family members that did this. Mm-hmm. So is that illegal now? If it is, that...
Bylaw rules about how big a house can be, and right now we're limited to words 1 through 4 for anything in the small or tiny home. I believe the small might be, because between 500 and 1,000 may have a little more flexibility.
But why?
Ask the city councilors.
Yeah, I mean, I'd get rid of that. You know, I'd get rid of that.
I think it's a trial run, and depending on how this goes.
Yeah.
I'm on a couple of Facebook pages that have a lot of interest in this. But right now, also part of the rules is you have to have a laneway. I have 2 children with significant disabilities, one of which will probably live with me part way anyway, all of her life. May or may not, depending on who she ends up marrying, if she ends up marrying. But I also like it as a way of intensifying some of these really great communities like we have in the downtown area, but also up in the mountain, and a chance for having a better community if we have smaller homes, we run into each other more often as families. It'll be the same thing with communities. We can go into these neighborhoods that are really great and add some more great people to them.
But that was a way that we built wealth, that you could build a rental unit in your backyard, and it's a small investment, but for somebody that's looking for affordable housing, you're buying less space. It's a really easy trade-off. This house here, which again, it's tiny, it's a tiny house, but that's in the South, they call those shotgun shacks, that you could literally stand at the back door and blow a shotgun through the building, and it's just a series of rooms that line up along a vertical hallway. That's an architectural typology that's common in a lot of cities, yet it's illegal in a lot of places. When we started doing minimum housing sizes, a lot of that was sort of an economic segregation and it's just this bias that just because you can afford less of a house that somehow you're going to bring down my property values. And
My understanding at this point in time, they can't be severed either, so if you have a laneway and you build a laneway house, it shares some of the common services with the main house.
yeah, I think you got to get past that.
Separated, severed, and can also then get a separate mortgage. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of issues there, but I wonder, which is the better build with all these little lots the city has versus the bigger builds that have a lot of impact in one spot?
Again, it's just study yourself. Do a map of the different housing typologies that you have. You have tiny little buildings all over the place in the city. And is your city dying because of it? Like what great plague happened because you have small houses in Hamilton? So, but there were biases that mostly in the 1960s where people started making those illegal. And sometimes that was racist. Sometimes it was because of who was in those buildings. And it was a way of not being racist because you were just naming a number. And what you're doing is it's economic segregation. And I think a lot of it is, well, okay, how about this? Try it for 2 years. What's the worst that can happen if you just throw out the regulation for 2 years and let's just see what kind of apocalypse happens if we have people building extra units? If anything, you're going to add more value to the community because you're going to provide more housing for people, which is going to take down the cost for everybody because there's more supply.
What I also hope is it would allow us to, with that extra density, then use those new tax revenues and even the cost of the builds to redo some of our lower Hamilton infrastructure.
Yeah.
We don't have proper water for the services that we need now, and people say, well, we can't add people. But if we add people, then we have the money then to build better resources for the existing people as well.
Well, it's also
Piggyback them.
it's also a broader discussion of why is the infrastructure limited in the downtown or the old part of town, and why wasn't that reinvestment added in the community as you grew up? So don't look at yourself as, well, this is what we're stuck with. It's like, well, let's talk about the fact that you've had 60 to 70 years of a lack of reinvestment in the core area where those pipes and everything else weren't upgraded because you were spreading your money elsewhere. So let's just be honest about what your city should be evolving and growing up, and we've all stunted our cities in certain ways. So just being honest of, again, I use that Moses as a joke, but it's kind of true. It's like, did Moses invent your dwelling unit policy? No. So you all can change whatever you want in your community. Just be rational about what the costs and the effects are, or maybe just try something. Try a little holiday period on it and just see what happens. But adding another unit on a place that's already got a street and a road and a pipe, you're actually adding more taxes to that property, which should be a good thing. It's making it more efficient.
Thank you.
A democratically supported, billion-dollar funded and underway LRT project that was killed here, largely fueled by these fabrications. Do you have any suggestion of how we can go past the data that no one is listening to that supports the LRT and have a chance, or do we just have to wait for all these people to get old and die?
Yeah, there's a, a lot of it is, I don't know the full story on the hit that was put out on your LRT. And I don't think you all know the full story yet either, from what I hear. And just the radio show that you all did was very informative. And the point that you all raised at the political level, because this is the world at which you operate, the political level. I am not a political animal. I'm more of a nerd. I just look at data and just it's either black or it's white for me. In the world of politics, there's a lot of invisible strings that I can't see. And the fact that they came down from Toronto and made the announcement here when they assassinated a project here, I mean, that was not a good move. And then the reaction that you all gave them was appropriate and well placed. And I think they learned a lesson of a political miscalculation. So I think that what you should be commended for is how your community got together, even with the resistance. Your community had a resounding, "You've got it wrong," to the province, to the province, which I think was great. That it actually galvanized your community. There's still naysayers. There's always going to be naysayers, and that's just life. That's the way every community is. You can't make everybody happy. And there's people that are like, "Well, I don't want an LRT." And it's like the light rail. It's like, well, no one's putting a gun to your head and telling you to get on it. This is for another part of our community to be equitable about their infrastructure. And this will make you money that will support your lifestyle. It's all in this system together, and it's all got to work together. We can't just build off one side in one way and then assume that everybody's going to be that way. It's a much more diverse community than that, particularly with this different kind of infrastructure that you have here. So I think that it was actually, I know it's hard to see this from your perspective because of the pain that it's caused on your community, but I think that this was a good moment for your community to get together to prove to the province that you're actually together. I say this in Asheville, where my state legislature calls us a bunch of bozos and, oh, those hippies up on the mountain, they're nasty, all this stuff. But that makes us galvanize to the point where we're in it together. We're like, no, I understand that it looks crazy from you down there in Raleigh, but we like our crazy. We're good together. We have a life with each other. This is who we are. We're not Toronto. We're not Raleigh in our case. So I know that, again, I don't know how best to put it, but I think that you have to stay the course. You leverage this point in this moment is an opportunity to put your words forward to the province. And like I did just for the heck of it. Just for fun, I'll give this to you all. Because I was trying to sort this all out. So I went ahead and read your provincial Golden Horseshoe Plan. So in your province, this is your province plan. This is what your MPs adopted is their plan. In it, they have guiding principles for putting public dollars, investing in infrastructure to make land use more efficient, to improve land use planning and infrastructure, to reduce, to manage growth, to do environmentally sensitive transportation options for your community. Their goals were to do this project. It says right here, to provide a framework for guiding infrastructure, to provide connectivity for other modes of transportation, reducing the reliance of automobile, doing transit, offering multimodal. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's just like, look, these are your rules. We in Hamilton, we're trying to follow your rules. And these are all their goals of managing urban growth, doing mass transit, increasing modal share in transit, supporting transit services, integrating transit services, working with municipalities, all of this. These are their rules. So they came down and yanked your funding and also didn't follow their own rules. Hold them accountable to that. We're watching you. Do whatever you want from up there. That's great. But we're making note of this. We're going to forge together as a community. We're going to hear from each other. Yes, there are people that naysay about it. There's people that don't like highways. There's people that don't like mass transit. There's people that don't like parks. Great. You've got to operate a city. In your city of how many hundreds of thousands of people, at this point you need to have a mass transit system that functions at the level of what you are as a population with this infrastructure that you have out here in these buildings. So I just think take this moment to be solid with each other and to realize you're all in it together and you have to band together against your province at this point. That's the way I see it.
How do you get people to listen to facts and evidence and well-reasoned arguments?
I try more facts. I don't know. I mean, I speak in pictures. I know that 65% of every audience are visual learners. 90% of our information comes through our eyes. So you just sat through like about a 58-minute presentation with 220 slides. You know, it's like I was delivering a message and information, and I was telling you a story about data. And that's my only challenge here, was to try to get y'all to think a little differently about how we approach the world that we live in, and try in an educational manner to tell that story. If you're going to come in with a closed mind and have confirmation bias and choose to not listen, I can't get past that. I can't get you to change your plugged mentality. I think that it's hard at a council level when someone is supposed to be a representative and they use their own confirmation bias to bully pulpit and manipulate the public process. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's intellectually honest. I hold my community accountable through a vote. I also hold my community accountable by how I speak in op-eds, or what I do as a volunteer in my community by putting my shoulder behind the actions that will help my community. So like I'm fighting a highway in my town. And I got into trouble because the highway is cutting through a poor black neighborhood. And I got in a car and drove down to Atlanta and had a meeting with the federal government about how they supported a highway that was cutting through a poor black neighborhood. Yet in their environmental impact statement, they made no mention of that. So I took a political hit in my community by doing that. I was out of character, as they call it in the South, by going down and doing that. I thought it was the right thing to do, and damn it, I'm going to stand behind it. So I think that you all do what you can. And in some people's minds, having garbage service every single day is a need that they need to have. Great. If it doesn't make any financial sense, I mean, somebody's going to vote for, if they're going to vote for being stupid with their money, y'all know it now, right? So there's a majority of voters. This is a statement that somebody's made that I want to support burning your money. That's an election.
Come back and do the same presentation when all the councillors are here.
Yeah.
I'll chip in. I'll give you some money.
We'll be posting the video, so I genuinely hope that they'll take the time to watch.
I mean, I think that it's, look, they need to bring an A game to the conversation about why it's a good investment to continue to blow that money. You know, it's like when you have other community needs, parks, affordable housing, helping solve getting better housing in the community to make it easier for more people to gain wealth in your community and add value to your community. How is that the best use of your money? To just have I need a bigger garbage can. Like, oh, poor you. You know, what's the community need, and is that the best community need? And you've just cited a lot of positive examples. But again, council has the prerogative to vote however they want. And if they choose to do silly things, y'all have to pay attention.
Next question.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation as well. This is a great slide to have up for my question. So it's about transit-oriented corridors and the challenges they face to cities in terms of affordability, and in terms of, in your experience in the cities that you've worked in, what have cities been able to do, or policies that they've implemented to deal with some of the inherent displacement and affordability issues that tend to come along with these corridors as they're built?
Great question, and I have an idea or a solution here. So we did a project in Salt Lake County, Utah, and yeah, here it is. And the thesis was, so this is an entire county. It's a massive county. The county mayor, it's a strong form of mayor there, he had this concept of thinking, could you look at municipal assets as an asset in the community? So that we're sitting in a municipal asset. This is an investment that your family owns at this point, and as well as all the open space around it. Are there spaces where we can harvest better value in our community? And so is there land that we hold in public that we could better leverage? Now, right out the door, if you own it as a public, you can assign, we want to make sure that there's affordable housing. We want to make sure that there's artist housing. Hell, I don't know. Let's put pink flamingos on it. Like, you can decide whatever you want because it's your public asset. So what are the needs that you have? Because the market's clearly going to shoot for the highest and best return on the property if it's done in the private sector. So could we leverage our land to get something out of it? So we evaluated, this is along their train lines. We did like a TOD cookie cutter and did a 5-minute radius walk straight down each train station and grabbed up all the land. Inside those donuts, it's about 3% of the land area of the county. It's producing 11% of the county's value. So there's already developers in those zones producing value of high potency on a small footprint, right? That's a 1-to-4 ratio of productivity. So this is all the publicly owned land. We just visualized it. So yes, the whole university over here, this is Salt Lake City, here's downtown, and then this is going down South Line. So you have all these other municipalities. So the county's like, why don't we just all work together? It's county land, city land, federal land, schools, anything that's public, let's put it into a public asset. And let's try to find a way to grow wealth off this and pay for things that we need. So, you know, you're not going to go and turn the whole university into private real estate, but you can grab a couple little parcels right here. So just by taking a couple of the parcels here and there around the system, that's enough housing for 24,000 dwelling units. The taxable value of all of that would be $13 billion of taxable value. Right now, it's giving you nothing. And so we're like, why don't you just use that, work with developers, you own the land, put out an RFP and say, like what they did in Seattle, we'll give a 99-year land lease, you're going to build apartments, those units are going to be at 65 to 80% of area mean income, it's going to be LEED Platinum, it's going to be mixed use, we want you to build a train station, it's your land, put a specification out there to the development community and get your community's needs met. You sit on the land, it's not paying you any taxes. So this is just another way of handling that, is find a way to do cooperative development. I use that corporation word when I talk about cities to get into a mindset that you are already in a cooperative development with developers, whether you like it or not. That land's not worth anything until you put a road to it. So now that that road's there, are you getting the best return, and can you make investments to solve your community needs? But this is the way to solve it. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So that will be our last question. I do have one follow-up question, Joe, that I've been dying to ask all evening. So we're sitting here in our City Hamilton Council chambers. We have this side of this horseshoe is literally the urban councilors. This side of the horseshoe is literally the rural suburban councilors. You can count 8 votes on each side. And we spoke earlier about, in your situation with the county and city, and we saw some of the maps that you had up showing where the wealth is generated, who's subsidized, and who is paying for who. So from the data, I think it's pretty clear to, I hope it is anyway, for everybody in this room, that the urban side of this chamber is, to a certain extent, subsidizing the rural side of the chamber. That's not right or wrong, as you said. That's a choice that we've made as a city. But when we have these conversations about trying to, really explain to our constituents and trying to move policy forward that requires a majority vote, how do we get those messages across to those people that might not want to hear that they're being subsidized?
Well, first, maybe you should change the order up and go urban, suburban, urban, suburban, urban, suburban around the table. So you're not drawing boundaries. And maybe go boy, girl on top of that. But I seriously, I mean that as a joke, but it's also, I think, maybe true. That maybe by having this divided boundary, it psychologically pits you against each other. So that could help. And I think that, I don't know if you all have ever, if anybody's ever attended an International Downtown Association, but the people that manage those beasts downtown, your BIA directors and bid directors, those folks tend to understand politics, and they also understand that they are producing the wealth. But they'll be the first to say that they have to consider the suburban folks because those are the people that work downtown, that we have to take on those folks and facilitate their paths in and out. And that's the nature of downtowns. So yes, these suburban patterns don't produce a lot of wealth, but you have to facilitate that individual to come in. And the trade-off is we're facilitating that, so you need to keep this golden goose going. And there are needs with that golden goose, and I'm sorry, it's expensive. But the more you invest in that system, the more the goose produces eggs. And where we get into a problem is where we see that we need to take everything out of the downtown and basically drain it of its wealth without reinvestment. And I think that's the challenge, is that go on a little walking tour, just 2 blocks, just maybe y'all go out for a big lunch together or something, and just go on a 2-block walk somewhere so that you can see the cracked asphalt sidewalks. It's like you don't even have sidewalks that have a measurable level of investment in certain areas. But you know, part of this is literacy. Part of this is understanding that I can come into your downtown and knock a building down and all of a sudden pay less taxes. I would run the numbers on Cannon and the intersection of Cannon and James Street, and then go 2 blocks in either direction. I mean, I was blown away at that. What is it? The Canadian Tire and the Tiger whatever auto parts store. Like literally a block off James Street. Like seriously, you know how little taxes that's producing? So why would you have that use in your downtown? So this is something that ends up draining your wealth of your community. It's an opportunity cost in your community. It also doesn't add value. Who wants to be next to that? So I think starting the conversation at a higher level of let's talk about this stuff and the impacts, and in defense of the councilors that are on this side of the table, they know what they know. They know their community. And conversely, y'all on this side should go out to those communities, and there should be baby mountains out there happening. How do you help them build their own wealth up on the escarpment? How do you build wealth in other areas? It shouldn't just be about downtown and there. It's like, how's the rising tide raise all boats? How do we work with those communities? They're not going to have downtown growth the way that this downtown is because they just don't have the infrastructure yet. But those areas should grow too. So like in the case of the Asheville model that I showed, so you can see out here, like Black Mountain, or down here in Biltmore Park, up here in Weaverville, we have those other people that we're all in the same county together, but people in Black Mountain hate us. They come down to our bars and nightclubs and all that stuff, but they go back to their little village up there, and that's cool. I'm happy for them. I go out mountain biking in their parks, you know? So it's like we're all in this together, and you can see their little bump going on here. And they're picking up the language of what they're learning in our downtown as well. So does that make sense? Did I get close to? Maybe try the different ordering of the seats first.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Joe. I'm going to bring up Councillor Nann for closing remarks.
Thank you. Not much for closing remarks other than to say thank you again, Joe, for your fantastic presentation. You know, it's for helping us see the value, the tremendous value of looking at the data and making informed decisions as we sit around the city table, council deliberating over our budget and how we spend our money. It also feels really ridiculous to say that, right? That we need to value data to make informed decisions about how we spend our city's money. I really appreciate you ending with the value statement about the fact that we are in this together. And part of the challenges that we face as a community is always having those difficult conversations with people who might believe in different things, but at the end of the day, how can we have a story-based understanding that move us together towards a goal of achieving upliftment for all of our neighborhoods? The goal for tonight's event was really to be a civic education opportunity for residents to better understand the data that we all need to be looking at. So it shouldn't just be a conversation for councillors around the table. It also needs to be a conversation with our residents. You fundamentally are the decision makers. And I think it's critical for us to break down the literacy that's needed for all of us to be engaged in the process. So, you know, some of the questions that I'm left with thinking about is, what are we willing to trade to build community wealth? How does equity factor into that? And how the heck are we going to hold this province accountable to the promise that it made to deliver the priorities that they set out following their own rules? And so if you're still fired up about that issue, we encourage you to continue to outreach to your to council, to your other elected representatives, and definitely to the task force membership if you want to. Write your own op-eds, write your own letters, share the story of tonight, your understandings, your takeaways in your communities. Help us continue the conversation in Hamilton. We also encourage you to share the links. As Councillor Wilson mentioned right at the top of the meeting, we will be, well, this has been taped, and we'll be releasing the tape on our websites, and so please do share that along with your neighbors and your neighborhood association web pages and social media platforms and so on and so forth. Thank you tonight for being here. Thank you for taking the time for being here. The conversation is still alive, and we're encouraged to see so many of you here and look forward to continuing it with you. Thank you again, Joe.